Hello, I'm Crystal with LoveLifeChaos.com. And today I'm here to tell you a story about a man named Kirk. But before we get into his story, I want you to stop a second. I'm going to give you a scenario. It's not going to be an easy scenario to put yourself in, but just try to imagine it for just a minute. Let's go down this road for just a minute and try and put yourself in this scenario. Imagine you're 22 years old. You just left your spouse, went back to your hometown where your friends and family are. And because you just left your spouse, you're staying on friends' couches, couch surfing. And one day, about 2 weeks after you left, around 2 o'clock in the morning, and the cops show up at the door and they arrest you. They handcuff you, put you in the back of the car, and tell you you're being arrested for the brutal murder of a 9-year-old child. It's hard to imagine, huh? Fast forward about a year, picture yourself sitting behind a defendant's table with the jury to the left of you, the judge in front of you, and you hear that jury say, guilty. And then imagine the judge is talking to you. You're having a hard time even comprehending what he's saying because you know you didn't do this, but you catch a few words here and there. Your mind is just so boggled. You have no idea what he's talking about. How could anybody find you guilty of such a heinous crime? But you hear the words monster. You realize he's talking about you. And then you hear sentenced to death by lethal injection. It's like, whoa. Hard to imagine, isn't it? Then try to imagine how you would feel 8.5 years later. You've been sitting in prison for 8.5 years. And 8.5 years later, you are finally exonerated. You have finally proven that you were not the person that killed this little girl. That's hard, man. You can take yourself out of that scenario now because hopefully nothing like that ever happened to you. But it did happen to a man named Kirk Bloodsworth. And Kirk was 22 years old when the cops came to his friend's door, the place he was staying, and arrested him, took him to jail. In 1984, Kirk Bloodsworth was arrested for the brutal R word and murder of a 9-year-old little girl named Dawn. Now, I'm not going to give you the details of the crime. I'm not even going to give you all the details of the trial, conviction, and sentencing. There's a lot of documentaries out there where Kirk tells his story, and honestly, I can't tell the story and give it the justice it's due, but Kirk can. So I encourage you to find the documentaries. There is one on YouTube called How I Escaped Death Row. I really encourage you to watch it. He is an amazing person, and he tells it in a very amazing, captivating way. It's a horrible story, but seeing him tell the story himself is pretty amazing. As Kurt was convicted in 1985 of a murder he did not commit. It was 1993 before he was exonerated for this murder. And that should be where the story ends, right? That should be the happy ending. After 8.5 years, he finally walks out of prison a free man. Kurt was the first person to ever be exonerated by DNA evidence, which is why I chose him. It's also why I'm choosing not to go into a lot of the details about the case and tell you everything about his story, because I really want you to go watch it. I really want you to hear it from him, because he's an extraordinary man that went through some awful circumstances, that had 8.5 years of his life taken away. And then he finally gets out. DNA evidence exonerated him. The judge signed an order releasing him. That DNA proved he could not have done it. The problem was, back then, DNA was so new. Very few people knew anything about it, and even fewer understood it. So A lot of people really believed he was the murderer, that the state of Maryland just freed a murderer. A lot of people believed that. Even once he was exonerated, he endured a lot of harassment. So his story didn't just end there. It took 10 more years for them to finally, even after the request of Kurt to run this DNA through CODIS, they told him they didn't have the money to do that. They told him he couldn't pay for it because he was still a suspect. So 10 years after he was exonerated, they finally run this DNA through CODIS. And guess what? They get a match. And the match was to a man named Kimberly Shea Ruffner, who just so happened to be in prison. And I can't remember exactly, but he went to prison shortly. I don't remember if it was shortly after the crime committed or if it was shortly after Kurt was convicted. But at any rate, he was in prison serving a 45-year sentence for a totally unrelated crime. And as it turns out, he and Kurt had even been in the same prison for some time. I don't remember if it was the whole time or if it was just a short time, but at some point, they were even in the same prison together. So you may be wondering why I'm even telling you this story. I'm telling you this story because as I start this journey, my YouTube journey, talking about wrongful convictions, I want you to remember Kurt's name. We will talk about other cases and we will talk about exonerations that don't involve DNA. But I wanted you to hear Kurt's story as the first man exonerated by DNA evidence. To date, 375 other men and women have been exonerated by DNA evidence, 21 of those of which served on death row. This is why I don't support the death penalty anymore. I can't. Does that mean I think some people don't deserve it? Nope. I do believe there are some people in prison that do deserve the death penalty, but I can't support it. And the reason I can't support it is because of people like Kurt and the 21 others that have been released from death row. You may say, well, the system worked. They were able to be exonerated, but does it? I mean, really, ask yourself, how many more are there? How many slipped through the cracks? How many have we already executed? How many weren't lucky enough to get exonerated? I don't know that we'll ever have all the answers to those questions, but that's where this journey is going to take us. Maybe we can get some answers to some of this. As we continue this journey, we're going to learn more about some of these other cases because there's a lot of people that have very similar stories to Kurt. Some of the stories are very different, and we're going to learn how they happen. Before I started on this road, I wanted to tell you about Kirk's story, and I wanted to encourage you to go watch his documentary. I'm very new to this YouTube thing, so if I can figure out how, I will link that video in the description below because I do think everybody should watch it because as he says, if it could happen to him, it could happen to anybody. And that's what we need to understand, and that's why we need to fight. That's why we need to do what we can to improve the system. I'm not saying make it perfect. We can't make it perfect. There's the human element. It's never going to be perfect. But we can do things to improve it, and we can get rid of the death penalty. Because in my opinion, killing one innocent man is wrong. Tell me how you feel about the death penalty. Because I will be honest, I used to have a very different opinion of the death penalty. Very different. And it was wrongful conviction cases that changed my mind. And now I can't support it at all. So just curious, what's your opinion? But for now, I just want you to think about Kurt's story as we take deep dives into what causes wrongful convictions and what we can do to prevent them. Thank you for listening. Be sure to hit that thumbs up on your way out and the subscribe button so you'll know next time a video comes out. And if you know anybody that might be interested in this type of content, be sure and share the video with them. And if you ever want to reach out, tell me your story, you can go to lovelifechaos.com or you can follow me on Twitter. For now, I just want to say get out, go spread some love, share some laughter, and avoid today's chaos.